So yeah, I mean, thanks to everyone here for organizing this and inviting us to talk. We've been making virtual reality films and experimenting with different things at Scenic for almost a year and a half now. And kind of first got involved when the New York Times did their cardboard mail out, and they started releasing some early nonfiction pieces. And, you know, my first thought was just, oh, this is, you know, interesting. How do I get involved in this? How can more documentary filmmakers get involved in it? Because at least at the beginning, and even now still, like I wasn't seeing a lot of just experienced documentary filmmakers, you know, who I would say are at the top level of the genre, like getting a chance to play with this technology, or just getting the opportunity to make these films, or try to just push and see what this medium could do. Like, is there a way for us to use it to tell nonfiction stories in a different way? Like a lot of times, I don't think VR is like better or than, you know, traditional filmmaking. It does something differently. So like, what's that thing, and how can we kind of use it to document reality better? I'm not so interested in like the more video game VR that is trying to produce an alternate reality. Like, you know, at least for what we've been doing, it's about how can we use this technology to better document reality, to kind of give viewers a different way to you know, watch cinematic stories that are based in, you know, in nonfiction. So it's been an interesting, you know, year and a half. We've been kind of experimenting and playing with a lot of different things. We partnered up with a few different outlets. Like we did some more journalistic stuff with the Wall Street Journal and Google for the launch of Google's Daydream headset, which is a new VR headset. So this is also kind of, to watch a VR piece like flat is also the kind of like the absolute worst way to experience the technology. But I'm assuming that some of you have in the room have put on a VR headset and watched stuff. Show of hands. Anyone who hasn't yet? A couple. Okay. Well, the VR arcade is across the street, and there's a few pieces. One of our pieces, the piece that I did with Sam Green, is over there. So definitely go check it out. It's black lights and neon, and
it's really cool.
The video arcade. But if some of you have seen like click and drag, like 360 films, like on the web, like the New York Times now does their daily 360 thing too, which is kind of, I think, a necessary evil in some ways, because there are only, I think, 5 million VR headsets like out there for people to even be able to watch this content in that way. I think it's much more immersive to see it in a headset. But a lot of times for the, you know, just to kind of get eyeballs and get numbers for places like the Times, they just need to put it on the website where anybody can watch it like a normal film, and you can click and move around, and, you know. But that idea of using that quality of the VR, cinematic VR can give the viewer to try to, you know, tell stories differently. They're just like a big reason that I wanted to get this group of filmmakers together and try to get them paired up with the technology and let them kind of get out and experiment with it, is that there's, I think there's still like a different kind of cinematic language that you can use in VR that really hasn't been explored enough. There are also, you know, like the computer-generated or game engine based technologies, which are also amazing and also can be kind of used to tell nonfiction stories. I think there's like a kind of almost going to be a kind of a merging of those two things together. But for us, it's just about, okay, how can we use this stuff to tell different stories. Like Jessica, you know, is a documentary filmmaker and just kind of got dropped into using VR, and I think it's been interesting for you, kind of looking at the ways that it's similar and not similar to traditional filmmaking. And
well, I think that's sort of the question of story, which is, I think, what we all look for. Like, how do you tell good stories? How do you capture your audience? How do you make it relatable? And the tools that you have in virtual reality are a little bit different than the tools that you have in flat regular quote unquote films, like you don't have a close-up when you use VR. So that's really frustrating if you're trying to convey any kind of emotional resonance, you know, that there's a real, you're a bit more constricted by the technology, and that in and of itself is a challenge, which is very frustrating to begin with. You're like, I just want my close-up back, please.
Yeah, it's like detail is not a good thing for this particular medium.
Right. But so we fight sort of against the limitations of the technology, and within that fight and within those challenges, we've sort of started to figure out some of the language. Like it took cinema 100 years to develop a language, and the language that we see now. So what we are trying to do at Scenic is really push those boundaries and try and make mistakes, and through those mistakes will hopefully emerge a sort of new language, and not being a slave to the technology itself while still sort of working within it.
Yeah, because I think in a lot of ways, maybe cinema, I mean, at least the kind of 360 video, cinematic VR stuff it's sort of video based, but maybe cinema isn't even the best frame to even explore this. Mm-hmm. It's like you're telling a story in a 3-dimensional space. It's almost like architecture is a better maybe metaphor.
Or an amusement park.
Or a theater, like a play kind of thing, where you're kind of, you know, the viewer can look anywhere, like just like we're looking at you. I can look over here and look over here. So how to incorporate that freedom that the viewer has within the piece to be looking at anything. I could be looking at the floor while you think, you know, there's something really dramatic happening over here that the viewer should be looking at, and the viewer's like, oh, it's like, but I always think about when we've been making the pieces, instead of thinking of the frame as this thing that rectangle that you're you know, putting the story in, the entire scene is the frame, and you as the filmmaker can be in the frame or not be in the frame. Some of these ideas are what Sam Green and I were sort of experimenting with the piece that's over at the Video Arcade. It's this idea of like, we're in the frame too with you, we're showing you pictures, we're part of the story. And it's also a way, you know, generally in VR, you can't just cut to the archive photo, you know, and scroll
it's hard
back.
to tell history in VR. It's hard to tell things that happen
Yeah,
behind you.
or archive footage.
But
But there are ways to do it, but it's, again, it's like experimenting with with the form and trying different things. And it's one more area that there hasn't been, you know, that much exploration. I mean, how long would it take you to make this? Like 2 years.
Yeah.
But 2 years is almost the entire history of cinematic VR. So no one's spending 2 or 3 years on a single VR documentary piece. There's a lot of just like pushing to kind of, you know, what's the next technology? What's the next form?
But I mean, in terms of storytelling, you know, you are able to convey these extremely complex stories. Like, you know, your wall piece is obviously such a perfect example of like an incredibly simple in terms of, you know, what we're watching idea, but that it's so fraught and has so many deeper levels. Like I think there's something really poignant in using that across all mediums, you know, that the story really needs to come first.
It feels like such a perfect place. It feels like actually such a perfect conversation for us to be having. This question of history and sort of historical narratives, bringing it to a 360 space is something that I've never thought of as, I've never heard anyone say it's a difficult thing, but now that I'm thinking about it, it seems like such a difficult thing, right? Like, how do you create an entire architecture, an entire world that's about a story that has already happened or that is to be explored sort of backward looking? For me, a lot of the work that I end up producing is in 2 dimensions. It's mostly sourced from static images and stringing them together. And hearing you talk about some of your work, I'm realizing that a reason for that is because a lot of it is sort of historically focused, and it's emerging from a research question or a data set and trying to figure out what the story is that's embedded in a data set. So for example, the first sort of web-based project I ever made was trying to look at the geography of incarceration in this country. And the way that I did that was by looking at the data set of where all of the prisons, 5,393 prisons, are located in the US, and trying to see them. And one way of seeing them beyond just dots on a map was simply using satellites and scripting something through the Google Maps API that would just give you a tile, an image of every carceral facility. And that portrait starts to look a little bit more stark when you just see scroll after scroll of these giant 6,000 person prisons. Trying to imagine what that would be in a sort of 360 narrative space is extremely exciting and sort of difficult. I know some folks have done like
Just
solitary.
put you in prison.
You know, like that,
Yeah.
right? And like that seemed like the terror of solitary, right? And then
Yeah. But well, and there have been some great pieces like the Guardian's 6x9 was a
You should
a
definitely
great
go
piece
watch it if you haven't seen it.
about solitary confinement.
Mhm.
But that idea, I mean, yeah, I think when you do try to do historical material in like a VR environment, it almost has, by default, has to be in like a animation or CG or photorealistic. Like you could do Tower, that documentary that came out about the Austin clock tower shooting. That could have been in 360, or it would be amazing to be inside that kind of animated environment. But or something like the Guardian 6x9 or something. You're going with a digital animation of the space, or it looks very photorealistic, but it's not, for me, it's not real. And this is this is an ongoing conversation in documentary period about recreation and animation and how you use those things. So it's all sort of possible. But like something that I would say about your prison piece, it's about what you don't do in that piece. I think that's really amazing. That you don't go interview a dozen corrections facility managers and you let people sort of form their own opinion or make their own story just by the way they ingest that data, which I think is super cool. Do you want to show a couple of your clips of some of the other
that
work?
sounds good. I think that there are maybe 2 queued up. Yeah. Oh, great. Okay.
Do you want to go through all 3 of them?
Sure. Yeah. We can talk about them after.
So now I'm solo that I can see under the skirt of an ant. Solo that I don't get high no more when I Geronimo, I just go hand. Solo my cup is a rojo, my cholo, my friend. Solo that I can admit when I hear that another kid is shot by the popo, it ain't an event no more.
Solo that I can admit when I hear that another kid is shot by the popo, it ain't an event no more.
No more.
So what that was is basically a second iteration of a project called Officer Involved. The first iteration was in 2015, taking the data of all of the officer-involved shootings in the US and looking at the places where these incidents happen. And most of those photographs were just scripted through Google Street View, and they were of sides of buildings or of cars. This was updated for 2016, and instead of looking at the places in the street corners in these sort of ghosted intersections, I wanted to try to manipulate the Street View car to just look up. And so every one of those frames in that film is from one of the places where someone's life was ended by the police this last year. And trying to think of a sort of different angle, I suppose, of how Street View cars can be used, not just to look horizontally, but to look up. I'm not sure which the next one will be. We'll find out.
color? What year did it turn to color?
I think, I want to say 97. The first image I think was the St. Louis Cardinals, like some baseball
Wow.
sort.
But also your choice, and especially in those two pieces of music, you know, we were talking about like, you know, what you didn't do to convey this sense of story, and I think that's sort of really important that we, you know, rely on the smart audience or the viewer to really connect the dots for us, and that we don't, as makers or filmmakers, need to sort of tell everybody everything. And I feel like your choice of music really lends that.
So that's maybe a question I have for you both, is how do you think about sound and about music when you're approaching a space that can be explored by a viewer?
So we try, what we found sort of in our, you know, year and a half of making mistakes is that the best tool we have as directors in a 360 environment is the sound. That you can trigger the way people look and where they look with audio in a way that you can't encourage them to do as well within sort of the sphere. So for example, you know, I'm talking to you and you start screaming over here, I'm going to look at you for, you know, next. So that sort of 360 binaural thing that's happening really helps you guide the viewer, the experience.
Yeah, there's also something about this idea of presence when you're watching, experiencing a VR piece in the goggles, that room sound is a big part of that. Spatial audio for sure, because if I turn this way, I'm going to hear a slightly different story, you know, as I'm moving, and that, when it isn't there, kind of makes it somehow, it's a barrier to feeling like you're actually present in the scene. But in the same way that if you had an on-screen, you know, a traditional documentary, and music just came in, you wouldn't really think about, well, sometimes I do think about it, it's like, well, is music actually playing behind that scene? Did the filmmaker put that in? Is that just like, you know, from the net sound, whatever, but it's like when you're in a 360 environment and you're supposed to feel presence, when the music comes on, you're just like, what the, you know, where'd the music come from? Or it's one more thing that, it's one more element that can take people out of feeling like they're actually experiencing something. So I think that the powerful and kind of scary part of VR is that your brain processes a VR experience differently than if you're just watching it on the screen. Like if you go to the movie theater and you're watching a movie, you remember that scene but you still remember it in the context of you watching it happen on a screen. And you can look away or you can, you know, drink something. But when you experience it in VR and you kind of can't look away, you're in that experience. Even though you know I'm watching this VR thing and I've got my headset on, your brain kind of doesn't, and it takes that as an actual experience. So you have memories from, your brain stores that as an actual memory or closer to an actual memory than if you were just going to watch it in a theater. So that's a really kind of scary thing too sometimes, because it can kind of implant false memories. Like I have dreams about VR pieces now, as if kind of I was experiencing it.
I was just going to ask, what is your dreamscape like? Like, do you have ideas that you end up executing that begin in dreams, or are they?
Yeah. Well, I do that anyway. I have a lot of like weird dreams, and also what I call creative misinterpretation, which is where you see something and you think it says one thing, or you think it's one thing. And you're, wow, that's really cool, but then you find out it's actually something else, but your version of what you thought it was is actually cooler than what it is. It's an idea. Does that make sense at all? Okay. There's a really quick story. Like I was on the subway in New York, and I saw somebody at the end of the car. It was a crowded car, and they were reading a book, and it was called Scenic Youth. I was like, oh, Scenic Youth, that's fine. It's kind of like Sonic Youth. It's like, it must be about young photographers or something like that. I didn't see it. And then the next stop, the subway car cleared out, and I could see the book, and it actually just said Sonic Youth. It was a Sonic Youth book. But in my head, I was like, oh, Scenic Youth, that's good. And then I file it away in my long list of stuff like that I use. But actually, that was when we started Scenic. That was I go every time I start a project, I'll go through that file again, and it's like a weird name or something like that. And I actually took Scenic from that. That's right. Nothing to do with anything at all. But yeah, I do have dreams in VR. I dream in VR, and I dream about new VR experiences that don't exist yet.
Wow.
Which that's really weird and scary.
What do those look like?
Well, I'll be kind of in them, they'll be happening, I won't be experiencing it like first person, but I'll kind of be a third person watching somebody else experience it, seeing what they're seeing. And then, you know, none of those have actually, I haven't started working on them, but actually I did write a couple of them down. It could be pretty interesting stuff. So it's weird, and it's one of those things that the more you watch, or the more you film or try to create in VR, the more your creativity starts to kind of like take it in new directions. Still to come back to like the Scenic thing, I knew if like Sam Green or Marshall Curry or Heidi Ewing and Rachel Grady or you know, Amir Bar-Lev, if you get super smart, super creative people like that thinking in like VR terms and trying to create, then they can kind of take it to places where that I can't either. So that was a big part of just trying this thing, just like what would these people that are obsessed with story and just how would they interpret this medium, and what can they do in it? Do you want to show another?
Yeah, let's maybe right before we show, I'll tell you sort of how I got there. I started making things that were really about meeting people where they were, and it was sort of right when everyone first got smartphones and everyone there was the App Store, and I was like, okay, I find myself walking down Broadway in Manhattan all the time, and the entire time I'm like this, right? I'm like walking by, you could probably run into me, I wouldn't notice. I'm like in my Instagram scroll or in Snapchat or something. So I was thinking about that alongside this drone war that I had sort of no sense of the contours of, right? The secret drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. And so I was like, well, I wonder what would happen if I was sitting there and my phone buzzed and I thought it was my friend texting me, and instead it was this sort of unsettling news from across the world. Would that change my relationship to my phone, or would it change my relationship to this country's foreign policy? And so I made a really simple app that would just send you a notification. Apple rejected the app 3 different times, calling it excessively crude or objectionable content. It was in the App Store for about a year, and then it was removed again. It was sort of this long saga. But it actually did teach me a lot about the contours of the geography of covert war and of drones. And so I started thinking a lot more about it when I worked with some journalists who report on US drones. And so as a result, sort of ended up looking at a lot of satellite imagery and sort of seeing like a drone in a certain kind of way. I think that one of the reasons I am drawn to satellite imagery is trying to think of what that sort of view, that sort of God's eye satellite view means. And so this next piece is kind of emerges from a lot of satellite looking and trying to sort of visualize the geography of the US-Mexico border in a way that is more than the soundbite we always hear about building a wall, but instead is about the entire sort of contiguous geography. So maybe we'll watch like the first minute of it.
Which is, it was just amazing, because for one, I could just keep watching, like, go by, because I get hypnotic, but also, I can say, oh, the US-Mexico border is, X thousands miles long, and you still wouldn't get it. You have no way to, like, correlate the actual, like, length with it when you see the terrain, even in an abstract, but
you should also watch, it's online, you can see you can all go home and watch it, because in minute 3 or 4, I think, it gets crazy. And you're like, I mean, that's sort of the, not telling your audience all this stuff and sort of expecting them to be smart enough to know that they're going to build a wall around the craziest terrain that you've ever seen. It's just not, that's why the title's so good.
yeah.
But I think that sense of place too, which we talk about a lot. Sort of our first question when we come up with an idea at Scenic is like, well, why VR? Why is this better in VR? Why is it going to communicate something differently in VR than it would in a regular movie, flat movie? And that idea of place is still so important to us in making cinematic VR.
Yeah.
And this is, it's the same thing. Like the what you think you know about this highly politically charged, enormous thing that affects so many of us, is all place driven. It's all driven by that. And that's kind of a sort of perfect storm for what we like to come up with as far as story goes.
One of the things that makes me so excited about the work that you both do is sort of grows from the limitations I experience around much of the satellite work, right? It's such a distant thing. It's such a flattening thing. I spend a lot of time making work in that space, but it feels like such a different thing to have a ground eye sort of view of the world, and really to take seriously subjectivity in that sense. I wonder what you feel like the limitations are, if there are any, of sort of the last 2 years of working in this space. Like, where do you see the barriers still for you creatively?
I mean, there's so many things in the field of VR that are just not set yet, from
Distribution,
capture technology to aesthetic approach to the business model to the audience to the playback technology.
Playback
Like it's like the Wild West. Like every single piece of it is totally in flux. So that's I guess can be a limitation. It's also kind of an opportunity, just because it's like you can kind of do a lot of things. You can create a VR piece on your computer with some really basic programming skills, and kind of get it out there. I think the biggest limitation is probably like a chicken and egg thing with the technology being out there for people to watch and be accessible. Yes, the web is accessible, and web VR or just like the kind of click and drag thing is a way to get the work out there, but the full experience of it is still putting on that, basically strapping a phone to your front of your face and watching things. But all that stuff is first generation. I mean, the Oculus Rift and the Vive and even the Samsung Gear VR. This is all first generation stuff. So just to kind of see the potential of it, even on the first draft, is pretty amazing. So, I think that's the biggest limitation for us in terms of cinematic VR, like 360 video, being a little bit constrained in terms of the camera movement. Like you're pretty much rooted in one place when you're shooting this, because or constructing it, because when you put the headset on, your head is the camera, basically. That's where you're getting the views from all these different array of cameras that are pointing in every direction. So if you are in a car, for instance, and when you're in the experience, you see there's a reason for the motion, somehow that your brain figures that out and it doesn't make you puke. But if you're just sort of like randomly moving and you can't discern why you're moving, your brain thinks you're hallucinating, and you've got to get rid of the bad berries you ate or whatever. It's a prehistoric response. So that we've done some stuff with drones. We've tried a lot of other things. Again, movement is usable. That generally you're kind of rooted in it's a staticness to it, which things like more computer generated animated VR, you don't really have that restriction. You can move around. And it's where these two kind of that and video-based stuff sort of intersect is, I think, like the next frontier for this, like where it starts to get interesting. But I think again, it's so early stage. This is iPhone 1 or not even that. It's just like it's so new. Even in like 2 or 3 years, that's nothing. So I think there are so many possibilities. I think that of how you make money and how you get funded for doing this stuff is another big reason why there hasn't been that much kind of experimentation, I think, on the nonfiction VR side. That is still being worked out. So it's kind of a weird moment. A lot of kind of different parts of it are still kind of in the process of being sorted out. Like how do you get money? What's the kind of best way to use the medium? It's all sort of happening, at once. So
what's the Google Daydream collaboration been like so far?
It's fine. I mean, the Daydream is a headset, but it's got some positional functionality. It has a remote that you can kind of use to, like The Guardian did a piece where you're in, actually, is it that one across the street? That you're in the sewers of London, and you use the remote. You're kind of on a walking tour. You can kind of move your way through the underground, and you use the remote as a flashlight, and you're kind of looking around. It's a pretty cool early use of that. But
it's also in connection with their Pixel phone. That's when they released the Pixel. It was sort of a jump. I think it was a kick to Apple, who hasn't done anything in the VR space. So they started the Daydream.
The bottom line is most of the content that's created in VR is done so to sell a phone or a device, like an Oculus Rift or HTC Vive. I mean, the people that are selling the technology are the ones who have the biggest interest in having great content for it, and a wide variety of content. VR, I'm hoping, doesn't just become kind of a gaming, platform, because I think there are so many other uses, but in order to have like a truly mass medium, it has to have a wide range of content and a lot of different audiences can experience.
I like to call it like we haven't had like our serial moment where, with podcasting, we all listened to podcasts, but then all of a sudden Serial came out and sort of changed it in some way, and all of a sudden your mom was calling you being like, have you heard of these podcasts? I'm listening to Serial, it's so great.
See, and that's problem, like when your mom calls now, it's just like, how do I watch it? Well, okay, Mom, I'm going to send you a phone and a headset, and then you got to navigate to it's a much less kind of easy sort of experience even.
Like as a good example for the distribution of it, I made a film about a woman chasing a bicycle land speed record where she went to the Bonneville Salt Flats, raced there. It's called The Fastest Ride. We produced it for the Wall Street Journal. She ended up going 147.7 miles on a bicycle. Really
spoiler
cool.
Spoiler
alert. But we released it in the Daydream. We released it as part of the Wall Street Journal's app in the Daydream, and we kind of
and
just...
like a couple thousand people probably saw it.
We kind of just sat there,
But then the Wall Street Journal did a full feature on this woman and Jason Gay, who's one of their sports writers, made this amazing piece, and then used all that VR content in the piece, and then you could watch it on the web, and then a million people watched it.
Tons of people, and all of a sudden it was this very clear example of how little the audience numbers inside a headset versus the audience numbers that are flat. And people are producing great stuff for Facebook, which has a 360 component in their programming, and some of it's wonderful. I mean, I think Frontline did a really great piece on food delivery in the Sudan, and there are millions and millions and millions of people are watching it. So there's certainly an interim moment right now where we need to figure out how to get people to watch it internally within the headset. Do we want to ask questions maybe now? I think
We do.
Yeah, let's.
Was that,
are you
is
good
there
with
a,
That
that?
sounds great.
yeah.
Do you guys
Does
have
anyone have any questions
questions?
about anything that we've been talking about?
Or not? Or like,
Go ahead.
Well, I have several, and you actually answered a lot of my questions already. One of them was about sort of I wouldn't necessarily call it stigma, but the idea that VR right now is sort of seen as basically like glorified gaming. And if that's something that you're sort of, kind of running up against when you try to present this as a more
Sure.
serious and story-based thing, rather than just, kind of a game that you can, choose
Yeah.
your own adventure kind of deal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one thing is like gaming has an established model where gamers are willing to pay for those games. So I think for, like, if you're bringing out a new technology, or like PlayStation just introduced their PlayStation VR that you can just plug into a Sony PlayStation if you have one. They're going to go for they're not going to probably do or get excited about my VR documentary about immigration and on the it's like
They're not?
well, I mean, I think there should, I mean, like, if it's a big enough user base, people have a ton of different interests and they want compelling stories. But since gaming is an established thing and it's easy to port gamers from, a flat screen into like a virtual experience, and they're willing to pay $50 for that game, that's where the kind of the technology and the talent and the resources are all going to be put behind that. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a kind of a struggle. It's like, because I think there's a lot of potential for the medium to do other things besides provide, first-person shooter type experiences. So it's just a matter of, getting more people creating in it. You've got to try to show what the medium is can do,
Right.
or at least glimpses of it, in order to get more people even in wanting to create in the medium, and also more people to wanting to sell it. Luckily, there's again, the Times has done a lot of amazing work on it, on kind of making VR kind of a mass, more of a mass medium, or getting people interested in it. And there's a lot of kind of Me Tooism among people that now want to be like the New York Times, or want to try to at least not seem like they're behind the curve on new technology. So there are a lot of outlets and a lot of people that are interested in nonfiction content or cinematic VR content. So yeah, I hope it doesn't end up just as a gaming medium, because I think if we spent several more years really thinking about it and getting in and tinkering with what you can do, we find something amazing.
I suspect it's also a little bit of a long game, right? Like when cinema first started, and there was something like people thought there was no future in this invention, right? And didn't even see it as a storybook medium, but you have, in this case, we're talking about technology, which is often the early adopters are like gaming and porn. But, I mean, those bases then grow up or not like gaming only for kids, but expand their interests over time, and it seems like the next 5 to 10 years might be that sort of headset might be a big hump, but it's good. I feel like it will become less and less over a period of time, because those bases do expand just sort of naturally.
Yeah.
especially if the stories are good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always funny to bring up the sort of the early adopters of DVDs, VHS. The internet was always pornography, and it's actually not happening that way now, which is surprising, because that's sort of always been what it is. But it is gaming, but if the stories are there, which is part of the challenge of doing this, and getting people who are storytellers excited about the medium and excited about the limitations that the technology and the medium provide. So it's like looking at those things as the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking at is VR now. I think we'll be laughing at in like 3 or 4 years. And a lot of times when we're creating in this medium, it's like, is anyone going to care about this stuff in 3 years? Will they be able to play it in 3 or 4 years?
Yeah.
But that, that doesn't stop me from wanting to like explore, and the lessons that we learn now, I think will be kind of,
And there also isn't, you probably bought Goodfellas like on 5 different versions of itself. Like somebody has a Goodfellas Laserdisc, Like we figure out how to move with our technology.
Yeah, and just figure out like what, like is an app a documentary? Like can you,
Yeah.
use whatever the next kind of technological development as a platform, as a way to tell a different story.
Right.
And like Josh was saying, like go where the people are. Using like a phone as a device for storytelling. I think it's like an obvious idea. Of course you should, because that's what we're constantly on now. And when the phone changes to something else, well, then we'll figure out how to kind of tell a nonfiction story in that. So.
This is a question kind of about distribution for VR content. If you're someone who creates a VR experience and you want the most eyeballs on that as possible, does the Google Daydream have, is that content distributed through the Google App Store?
Yeah.
Or does each experience have to sort of create its own app?
Yeah.
Or, if you're someone who works for Wall Street Journal and you've created this experience, then the question is, well, do we create our own app that's only available through the Wall Street Journal website, or do we then, is management at Wall Street Journal okay with us publishing that content through the Google?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it all depends, like, who's paying to create it, and then there's a million different ways to kind of distribute it. That you can create an app and have that in the Google Play Store, or you can go through a platform that already has an app. Within, or New York Times, already has like an installed base of like 800,000 people or something. So, those platforms and those companies are licensing content similar to the way we would create a documentary and then go out and like, okay, is this HBO going to
Do you know
want
of
to do
a
this?
single company or app that's available through the Google Play App Store, say, that's delivering VR content, that's sort of serving as a distributor?
Yeah, there's
for
lots.
documentary?
Jaunt does that. There's a bunch. You can go on and look through. Whether they're paying for it or whether it's just really like, oh, we're going to get your thing out to our 500,000 users of the app is a different thing. And then it's like, okay, well, does the Guardian want to put something out? Like, what's the content? If you did something that was about drone strikes, VR,
Well, if you're a VR enthusiast and you know that, whatever media organization comes out with their next piece,
Yeah.
that will be available on that app.
Mhm.
it's just more apps that you need on your phone,
On your phone.
now.
Yeah, I
And
don't want
your
every
thing.
experience to have its own app, and then you end up with.
Right.
That's how it is. That's kind of how it is right now, though, because I think there is a lot of like VHS or beta happening. Things will only play on certain platforms because or they're exclusive to that platform because they want, Google wants people to buy their headset and their
Pixel.
phone. So they went out and spent, flowed a lot of money to a lot of content providers to make stuff exclusively for that. So it on some levels it is about selling devices, but like we can use that because it's a platform to get out, to also help fund things, but also to get out to a potential like wide audience. Or you can just throw it up on Facebook 360 and there's millions of people watching those 360 videos on that and on YouTube. So
How do you handle that stuff? Because your work is like you tweet about it and then everybody I know is sending me the link for it.
who pays you?
So I do work with journalists during the day, and all of them are actually in a similar place. I think they know that this is the next sort of frontier for their work, and I think people are kind of looking around, figuring out, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to both make the argument internally that this is something we want to move forward with, and also figure out which platform is the one to make it for. I'm certainly, thinking about the phone apps that I've made. I started with the iPhone because I had an iPhone and I used one, and it was sort of meant for other people in the States that had iPhones. But I ended up making an Android app, and now it feels like the ecosystem is is solid enough that you can pretty much make an Android app and an iPhone app would be fine with most of the sort of flat phone apps. But I'm curious if this is sort of like the beginning or the middle perhaps of like the platform wars of is Facebook 360 going to win, or where will, if you were placing bets, I suppose, where would you guess are going to be the sort of...
But, I think that's a good question, but I also think that I think when we first started doing this as regular filmmakers, people were like, oh, so you're only doing VR now? It's like, well, no, we're going to make lots of kinds of things. And, some stories are much more meant, like you would never make a Mavis in 360, that's, maybe you would do a partner or something, but we don't cancel each other out so much. And I think that's kind of the same answer. Like some projects are meant to be for certain platforms, like a Facebook 360. The technology might dictate it. Like, for example, not to get too technical about it, but is it a monoscopic project or is it a stereoscopic project? Because if it's stereoscopic and it feels much more immersive and in-depth, 3D, it's filmed a different way, and you wouldn't put it on Facebook because you would lose so much of the experiential piece of it. But, if you're just using a Samsung Gear and it's a monoscopic thing, then why not put it on Facebook? Why not have as many people as you can?
I think it's still so early that no one's come up with a beautiful, seamless easy way to experience true VR yet. Yeah. I wish Apple would just do something as as beautiful as they used to do in terms of creating an ecosystem where you put it on and you don't have to fuck with it. It's just and there's all this content and you can explore things. No one's put all those pieces together yet in an accessible way. If you get an Oculus Rift, you still have to have spend $1,500 on a PC to run it.
And then have a living, like a place in your home or office to install it, exactly.
There's questions of accessibility, both to the technology, because now it's just even more sort of exclusive than even, standard web stuff or app-based things. So a lot of this kind of the Facebook 360 and YouTube 360, it's those things are popping up kind of almost to fill this gap because there isn't enough headset technology out there for people. So it's a weird stopgap. So I'm not sure it's going to be like the war, the format war yet. It's a kind of an interim battle, but I think the bigger battle is just how do you make this really compelling and really accessible to a wide audience, and also have the content to back it up. So.
Just had a question about visual language and storytelling. One of the things that's really exciting to me about VR space right now as a filmmaker and someone also who teach editing a fair amount of post-production, and I'm teaching that out and grounded in history, and there's a lot of analogs there, thinking about the early days of developing sort of cinematic grammar, and that's what's super exciting. It feels like that's happening right now. Even some of the connections you were saying, it's like a theater piece in a way, which of course the earliest films were they sort of were treating it in that way, but then there's certain analogs that don't connect, the revolution of the close-up in cinema was massive. In this case, maybe not so much, but have you experienced in the last couple of years, you talk about audio and how sound really works. Have you experienced any other kinds of breakthroughs where you're like, oh, that's cool, that works, so we didn't think about that.
So one of the things that that was a bit of an aha for me was I feel like in documentary the goal is to get away from the talking head, that our premium in terms of good, filmmaking is verite, and that's fine. It's actually the opposite in VR, that there's something about having the presence of a person engaging with you directly to the camera that feels really, if it's positioned well, and there's sort of some choices that you would make around it to make the person that is watching it feel comfortable. Do you have them sit next to you? Do you have them sit across? But there's some choices in there that actually have been really helpful in terms of telling the story, because I feel like especially in the stuff that we were seeing coming out of the Times a year and a half ago, it was all very voiceover, you know, you're in the spot, you're in the crazy spot, in the place that you can't see ever, and then there's somebody telling you how to think about it, and it was less experiential that way.
I mean, it's not to say that
That's not
can't
bad,
work,
there's not, you
but-
know,
well,
there's other choices though, and I think that's the language.
Well, one of the things that kind of was an influence on us is actually this study that was done by Katie Newton and Karen Sukup. It's on Medium. There's a post about it on Medium. It's called The Storyteller's Guide to VR. If any of you are interested in this stuff at all, I would recommend it. But Katie was a design researcher, and she just basically applied really basic design research to this question of how do audiences process narrative in VR differently than they would in a traditional flat film. And it was pretty amazing, and they kind of based it on showing a scene of a documentary to viewers and letting them first kind of see like 90-degree angle of view, 180 degrees, and then 360 degrees, and like let different groups watch the same basic scene. And it was and while a narrator was telling them the story, giving them facts about the character's name and what they did and all this other stuff. And it was incredible to see, like at 90 degrees, which is basically your traditional movie screen, you know, with everybody remembered the character's name, everybody kind of had a backstory that they came up with, you know. They knew, kind of paid attention to what was happening in the screen. When you up it to 180 degrees, like only half the people remembered the character's name. People were focused on this cookie that was like close to them that had no bearing at all, but it was near them in the field. And then when they opened up to 360 degrees, no one remembered the character's name. No one remembered the narrator's name. The narrator had said their name. So part of that is, you know, there's a novelty to being able to look all around. There's that, you know, fear of missing out. So people are looking like this, and you know, they're missing key elements. But what it taught us was that like complexity, when there's visual complexity, your brain is going to be much less able to process spoken, you know, oral narrative or oral information or story information. So that idea of kind of when there is story information to impart, keeping the visual environment a little bit more minimal and a little bit less distracting. Again, it seems sort of obvious that if there's a lot of distractions, you're not going to get the story. But that really is the case in VR. So simple thing, just like camera placement, I think is a huge one, because generally you don't walk into the middle of the theater and stand right in the middle of the room and be like this, looking all around. You're going to want to be on a corner or on the edge and kind of get that sense. So sometimes we intentionally limit the viewers, you know, what they can see, basically. Or you turn around, you're like, okay, it's a piano, I don't really need to look there again. I'm going to look at the stuff that's happening. So camera placement is a huge part of that. Again, the start of this visual language discussions.
You have a question?
I am thinking the idea of just seeing the flat screen. Your senses are concentrated just on that. So it's not only the amount of information, let's say, that the viewer receives, but your senses are stimulated only partially.
Mm-hmm.
When you have the whole immersion that would be the VR, then you have not only so much more information, but all of the senses are involved. So there's the degree of complexity is so much higher. How can you measure that?
Well, but again, there's ways you can tell a story just with that sense of presence. Just the fact of the kind of the sense of being in a place.
I mean, look at Josh's piece. Just look at the wall piece. I mean, he told an enormous story with just showing you how long the Mexican-American border is. It's a very sort of, I say simple, but I don't mean simple. Like that there's something, so it's a backstory that's coming along with it. You know, you want to tap into what the person sort of already knows maybe about it too.
Yeah, but the VR thing, again, it's like whenever the physical environment that you're in is a character in or is part of the story, I think VR works really well. If it's just a story and it has nothing to do with the place you're in, then it's less successful. But
What's the most minimalist experience that you feel like has worked in the space?
6x9. The salt
Do
dragon
you think that's a
confinement.
minimal experience?
I think the place is minimal.
Sure, the setting is minimal.
I mean,
But there's a lot of information within that, and that's probably why you can do a lot
that's
of
why
information
you can handle it.
in that,
But
because the visual environment is so stark.
yeah,
But it's also part of the story is that when you're in solitary, you get nothing of information, and you're just staring at the same walls. And that, I mean, I think that's a really good example of a piece where the fact that it's in VR gives you a visceral sense of what the subject matter is. You feel like you are in a 6 foot by 9 foot cell. And there is a power to that. It was one of the first pieces where I'm like crazy claustrophobic too, so I was just like, oh my God. But it really, you feel viscerally like you're in there, and you start to freak out a little bit. But that's exactly what they're trying to get across with the piece. So anytime that you can do that, I think with any medium, it can be hugely successful.
anything else? No? Cool.
All right, well, yeah, thanks for coming
Thank you
out.
for
Thanks,
coming,
Josh. Thanks,
and-
Jessica. Thanks, True.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
Thanks, True False.